work very closely with either your attorneys or your HR people, because in all honesty, I mean, it's going to be a day-by-day sort of analysis in terms of what we can or can't do, and a state-by-state or even like a county-by-county or city-by-city analysis too. Because a lot of cities like San Francisco, Chicago, New York have their own indigenous labor and employment laws or rules. So you got to work closely with them, because right now it's a very labyrinthian enforcement system, and there's so many unknowns, especially on a day-to-day basis.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, president of Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. And this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. It's the last Thursday in February, and the new Trump administration continues to give us things to talk about. Joining me for this month's HR News Roundup is Charles Krugel. Charles is a management side labor and employment law attorney in Chicago. He's also a faculty member at Loyola University's Quinlan School of Business, where he teaches employee relations. Welcome to Good Morning HR, Charles.
Thanks, Mike. Great to be here.
So it's been a month, and we'll jump into the stuff that's been going on most recently with the Trump administration. But we had back on, I think, February 3rd, the Day Without an Immigrant protest. And we've had a few of those before, I think, and they've never really gotten much news other than the planning of them. But this month down here in Texas, in Dripping Springs, there's a local hamburger company called Hat Creek Burger Company, and they had 8 employees who said, hey, we want to, we're not going to be here on the day of work, or they told an assistant manager that they weren't going to be available for work that day because they were going to honor the Day Without an Immigrant, where people say, here's what life would be like if we didn't have immigration, and they don't come to work, and everybody every year hopes it's going to grind the economy to a halt, and really it just ground one little burger place, as far as we can tell, to a halt. But the management said give us a list, and they got a list of them. And then management, I guess, realized, oh, that's our whole staff for the day. And so 8 people didn't show up. And management the night before sent text to everybody, asking them to show up and even offering them financial incentives and little bonuses, and we'll have a party or do something, but show up for work. Well, 8 people didn't, and management fired them, and fired the assistant manager, who did show up, but management felt like he was part of the issue with the employees not coming. So far as I can tell, Hat Creek Burger hasn't replied to any of the press inquiries. So everything we're hearing is from employees who got fired. So we have to take that with a certain grain of salt. But what's your take on the national, Day Without an Immigrant, that idea? How would you handle that as an employer if your employees wanted to, or how would you counsel your clients if your employees wanted to do that?
Well, all right. So you're in Texas, and Texas is not exactly a union-friendly or labor-friendly state, unlike where I'm in Illinois, which is very union and labor-friendly. I would say that maybe under Biden, it would have been a greater than 50% chance that this would have been found, that the firings would have been found to be illegal, a violation of concerted associated activity under the National Labor Relations Act. But under the current, with Trump in office and what he's done recently with the NLRB, which he's basically gutted the NLRB, there's a good chance that, or right now I'd say 50-50 chance that the company won't be found liable for violation of the NLRA. It's possible they could be found in violation of Title VII of the Equal Employment Opportunity Act, basically, which I think they would do like what's called a disparate impact analysis to figure out, well, did they fire largely or only Hispanic employees? And if they did, that could possibly raise discrimination against people of Hispanic origin. The fact that they fired the assistant manager probably looks good because it shows that they didn't treat management differently than rank and file employees. But I would say that there's a decent, at least a 50-50 chance that they'll be found in violation of the NLRA, and likewise, 50% chance that they won't be. In Illinois, it'd be higher.
It'd be higher than that. Definitely. And we're going to talk about what Trump's changes at NLRB, but Jennifer Abruzzo, as general counsel, would have definitely loved this case. I don't think William Cohen's going to even sniff at it. But talk about a violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, how would the fact that employees didn't show up for work, I mean, how would that be a violation of Title VII when you're just, you're an employee, employees don't, all 8 employees don't get to choose to take off a day whenever they want to and just walk out and close down the restaurant. What might the argument look like for a civil rights case on that?
It'd be disparate impact or disparate treatment, basically that they treated one class of people based on Hispanic ethnicity differently than majority white people. Mm-hmm. So that, I think that would be the argument. The EEOC is pretty liberal in all 50 states for the most part. So, I mean, even though it's a federal agency, each state there's different regions. So they would all have, each region has their own, I guess, culture, but they're all pretty liberal. So I think they would find in favor of the employees. So not so much the treatment of them, but the firings of them that, could be in violation of Title VII.
So you get a right to sue letter probably, because unless they really decide to take this, the agency to take the action. And so then you get a right to sue letter. So maybe a federal court, you can convince federal court that, and I guess you'd have to show that, and it would maybe hang you up if you had white employees or employees of some other background who didn't show up for work and without, violated the policy, whatever they're called, no call, no show policy is or whatever, and, intentionally didn't show up.
Let's say it was 4 to 4, 4 and 4,
Mm-hmm.
4 whites and 4 non-white.
Right.
Then, if all 8 are fired, then basically you can make a decent case that it's not racial discrimination. There's no disparate impact. Or
if whites had chosen to not come in some other day and the company didn't do anything about them not coming in.
Comparable,
So
comparable treatment. It's a little bit of, I think it's a little bit of a stretch, but it's possible.
Well, and the reality is none of us want to defend that case, right? I mean, that's the that's what you really, you don't want the claim, you don't want to deal with the issue coming back at the employer. So trying to figure out how do we respond? So what would you have suggested an employer do when they find out that, hey, tomorrow, basically most of my team's not coming to work to observe this thing that's completely political and unrelated to work, whatever that thing was, whether it's a Day Without Immigrant or some march on whatever, those kind of things. How would you tell an employer to respond to that?
Well, if you want to make the argument that it's a political statement, I think you can make a stronger argument as the employer, because then arguably you're not firing them for concerted activity, like based on wages, hours, and conditions of employment, but really based on a political statement. And that's not really, I don't think that's protected activity in the workplace under the NLRA or the Equal Employment Opportunity Act.
Yeah, that's basically what this was, right? I mean, I think it's a political expression because it was really designed to remind the U.S. that we need labor and that our immigration policies have been screwed up for 40 years, and to advocate for freer immigration, or in this case, to advocate against a deeper government crackdown, and on employers who are hiring undocumented employees and not deporting all these people. So it'll be interesting to see if anybody can convince a lawyer in South Central Texas to take that case, and Hat Creek Burger Company. I don't know how big an organization that is, but it may not even be worth going after. I mean,
there's always going to be attorneys who want this, because basically, I mean, in these disputes, generally speaking, attorneys are the only ones who come out ahead.
That's
true. We're the only ones profiting off of this. That's at least 75%, I think, of all labor and employment disputes.
That's crazy. Yeah, and so you get these big class action settlements, and the people who make it are the attorneys who make the money on the settlements, and the parties, who are parties to the settlement get small part, right?
I've been on my own now for 24 years. I've been doing this for about 30 years. I've never seen as many lawsuits flying around right now in the employment realm as there are.
Interesting. What's the trend?
I think it's a combination of factors. We're still in the hangover from the pandemic. So money was, people were making money for not working or working less hours, and now, they're hung over from that and they're not making any more money. People are losing their jobs. There's a lot of the change from Biden to Trump. A lot of people are losing their jobs also. Inflation. I think climate change has a role in this too, in terms of like increasing anxiety and changing work demographics. So
interesting. Yeah. So good future for the rest of your career then.
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah.
If you had asked me 25 years ago if I'd still be doing union work in 2025, I probably would have said very little, maybe 15 to 20%. But right now, the union stuff is at least half my work.
Up there and where you're at, I can imagine. Illinois,
all over the country,
yeah.
There's a lot of talk about unions now, and there has been since the pandemic. The pandemic seems to have increased a lot of anxiety, human resources anxiety, or anxiety in the workplace, leading to more concerted or more activity in labor.
And I've been in the HR world as long as you've been practicing law, and my experience is largely that the companies that end up with unions are the ones that deserve it. I think employees, at least here where I'm at in Texas and the southern U.S., are slower to adopt a union unless things are really bad. Is that your experience up there too?
Yeah, I would say that in at least half the situations where a union gets voted in, it's because the company deserves it, because they slipped up on communication. Generally, the mistake isn't something in communication. Bad, practices in terms of explaining wages, hours, or benefits of work to employees.
Mm-hmm. 10 years ago, 11.1% of the workforce was unionized. Now it's 9.9%. So it continues to decline down. And that's after 4 years of a Biden NLRB that was really doing everything they could to promote union membership.
Well, Biden's extremely pro-union.
Yeah. And I think that's going to change now. But Amazon, a North Carolina Amazon facility voted earlier this month not to go union. 3/4 majority of the voters, the members who voted, or the employees who voted against unionizing. I mean, it's like 2,447 against 829. So at least, North Carolina is the South.
Southeast tends to be anti-union. Texas, the South there. So yeah, up north. Well, Indiana is not as union friendly as Illinois is. Illinois is extremely union friendly, and even Wisconsin and Iowa aren't as union friendly as Illinois. Us and Michigan are very union friendly.
That's interesting. And this would have been Amazon, the whole company's second union facility. The first one was a Whole Foods in Philadelphia, which is up northeast, and it's not totally surprising. I just thought it was interesting that the union chose this North Carolina plant as the place to try to try for their second one, just because of the just that culture down there. You would think a union would go for the low-hanging fruit, someplace up north where they were more union-friendly.
No, I've seen unions trying to get into the southeastern states for decades now. So, every once in a while, like in Tennessee, in the auto plants there, or Alabama, various retail outlets there, there's always been a lot of activity in the southeast. They haven't been very successful, but they keep trying, the unions.
Yeah. Even labor there, I guess in the South is a little bit more conservative and not as gung ho to join up. And if they're paying much attention, a lot of folks who end up with a union are trying to figure out how to not pay the dues after a year or two because they often don't deliver what they promise.
Well, yeah, I think there's less corruption among the unions in the South than there is in the North. I think there's more corruption with the unions in the North. I grew up in Chicago, and I grew up in a largely union family too, and I've had relatives who worked for unions or been closely associated with unions, and they worked for unions. Like in management positions within the union itself. Actually, I worked for a labor union before I went off on my own, so I've just seen more corruption. More bloat, mismanagement among the unions here, especially among the pension funds.
Well, and one of the things Amazon with that Philadelphia Whole Foods is they've got an appeal to the NLRB saying that the union officials coerced and intimidated workers, which It's not the first time I've ever heard that claim. But I've also talked to people who are in in environments that went organized, and they said, yeah, there was a ton of pressure. People were showing up at our houses and really pushing. So under the Biden NLRB, they probably would have fallen on deaf ears. But under the Trump NLRB, who knows? Because we don't have an NLRB right now. I mean, the president fired Gwen Wilcox, and so we have only 2 members on the NLRB now, a Republican and a Democrat, but they can't make any decisions because they don't have the required 3 votes to make it.
Well, they might be able to make decisions, but I don't think they're enforceable.
They're not going to rule on any cases. Yeah. And then he also fired Jennifer Abruzzo, who was the general counsel, and appointed William Cohen. But it's an interesting. These independent agencies have these positions like, you've got a board, but then you've also got this general counsel. That seems odd that that's a presidential appointment because usually the general counsel is just advising the board, but in these cases, the general counsel really is kind of the law enforcement piece of what the NLRB does. I mean, sets the tone and says, here's what our interpretations are, or my interpretations are, and really the administration's interpretations of the NLRA are.
Well, and they also have an extra layer with the administrative law judges. So they're the ones who are handling the first level hearings or complaint hearings, trials, and then it goes up to the board. Or you can also ask for general counsel review, I think, at certain points, too. So it's a little bit more labyrinthian, whereas if you compare it to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, they don't really have ALJs. They just have investigators, and then they have findings. They make their findings, and then they either sue or don't sue. Or they can issue a right to sue, like you said, a right to sue letter, which... that could be issued based on dismissal or based on plaintiff's attorneys asking for a right to sue letter to get it out of the EEOC and then just take it to a private lawsuit.
Just to take it, yeah. And so with William Cohen now as acting general counsel, he came in, and again, it's like the executive orders. We talked about it last month with affirmative action executive order being rescinded. And it was kind of shocking to me. I've been in HR all these years, and I never realized that the affirmative action plans for government contractors was primarily based on an executive order. Congress had never codified it, and that's kind of weird that they never got around to doing that in all these years.
I don't think that's weird, by the way. I just think that's Congress's risk avoidance, trying to avoid controversy and all that. Yeah.
Especially the last 2 decades. Just not writing, not doing their job and leaving it to the administration. So hopefully they'll start doing their job soon. But
that's where some of the, or a lot, not some, but a lot of Trump's power grab, where his theory of where the authority comes in because Congress hasn't acted.
Yeah, and he's definitely doing it, but now he's got William Cohen in as, I don't know if it's Cohen or Cowan, but I'm going to say it both ways.
Cowan, I believe.
Cowan. He's, and he came in, and a lot of the memos that Jennifer Abruzzo put in place that really gave employers heartbreak, he just rescinded them. And so it's the same kind of situation. So the ban on confidentiality and non-disparagement clauses, and severance, non-competes, captive audience speeches ban, gone, non-compete, stay or pay.
Illinois, though, we still have a captive audience ban here.
Yeah, and a lot of states still have those. And so and maybe that's the question, is maybe states should be, should drive some of these things and not, have one size fits all. And let's see what works and what doesn't. And then the mail ballot elections that came in during COVID, he rescinded that order as well. So that's a lot. But, like the non-compete agreements, the courts have already said that was outside, that was outside of what the Federal Trade Commission could do. Yeah. And so I'm not sure that that was really making a big difference to a lot of employers worrying about it. Talk about stay or pay agreements, because we don't hear about those a lot. But I mean, paying, I'm going to train you. You come on board. I'm going to give you information. I'm going to train you. I'm going to invest in you. I'm going to pay your college or something. And you agree to stay here and be a happy employee for X number of, years or whatever. Do you see many employers who want to do those? Because it seems like I see it maybe as a retention bonus kind of thing, something like that. But other than that, I don't see them much.
For higher paid employees, yeah. I mean, when you're compensated well enough for it, and it's legalese, it's called like consideration. So the more, we give you more perks in exchange for you staying on. So you're not going to see that as much in lower paying jobs as you would, I think, in higher paying jobs. But it's a useful tool, and it could be enforceable, like, if you have sufficient consideration in exchange for the promise to stay, and it's reasonable, a reasonable period of time.
Right. Yeah. It's not, you can't stay here the rest of your career.
Yeah, exactly.
Or right? Yeah. What about in Illinois? What are your laws about confidentiality agreements or non-disparagement clauses, non-competes? What's the world like up there?
The government here, the legislature, has basically done away with them.
Okay.
So, now I think the minimum pay requirement for most agreements is like $65,000. And that's sort of the benchmark. And basically there's other other considerations such as reasonableness in terms of the amount of time you can restrict somebody and the geography where they can, work or not work. So. And
those, that's, except for the dollar cap, that's pretty similar to Texas and a lot of other places. That a lot of states have some rules about that non-competes have to be reasonable geographically and things like that.
It was a good idea. There were too many businesses that went way too far with this, became really obnoxious, and I think the poster child was Jimmy John's. John's sandwiches.
Yeah, what did they do? What was theirs? That's right. Even the sandwich makers had a non-compete. That's right.
And that was just obnoxious. That was just ridiculous.
Yeah, it makes
lower paid jobs.
Yeah, it makes sense if somebody's really getting some. But some company secrets, some unique training, or access to formulas, things like that. Maybe that's relevant. But if you're flipping burgers, you're making sandwiches, and rolling it down to that level, I think. Well, first of all, it's just going to give you, when it gets out, it's going to give you a bad reputation and just make it harder for you to find. It's going to make it hard to find the workforce you need.
To me, it was equivalent of like food poisoning at a fast food place. If you really want, if you want to scare away employees, prospective employees, and customers, just try to restrict your employees like that, especially lower paid employees.
Or if you're in South Texas, fire half your staff for not showing up for a day without an immigrant, and then try to recruit where you've got majority Hispanic populations in a lot of places. Sure. And so I think, employers will hopefully think through some of these things before they take actions, whether it's, those one-off instances or in planning their employment agreements, things like that. But given the NLRB's situation, who knows how long it'll be before we have a quorum on the board, or
could be 4 years.
Yeah, it could be. So but do you think there's anything employers should be doing right now to change their current behaviors given this NLRB's, situation, or if Trump administration comes in and staffs it and they start executing, much more employer friendly, NLRA interpretations, what should employers be doing?
Work very closely with either your attorneys or your HR people, because in all honesty, it's going to be a day-by-day sort of analysis in terms of what we can or can't do, and a state-by-state or even like a county-by-county or city-by-city analysis too, because a lot of cities like San Francisco, Chicago, New York have their own indigenous labor and employment laws or rules. So you got to work closely with them, because right now it's a very labyrinthian enforcement system, and there's so many unknowns, especially on a day-to-day basis.
And the feds get all the attention, but there's state laws, and even at the city level. Most cities have, and it always surprises employers when they get a claim there. Most cities have their own ordinances, you know, for age, race, sex, national origin, religion, gender, all those things. And the cities are usually well ahead of the state or the governments in creating those things. And so
the liberal cities are,
yeah. Well, I mean, even I'm in Fort Worth, which is in many ways what people call the last red, big city in Texas, 12th largest city in the country now. And we've since the 90s had a human rights ordinance in our and that's a pretty conservative city relative to Houston, Austin, Dallas, and so and Texas is Texas too. So
The legal structure is in most states, in most jurisdictions, co-op, court, whatever jurisdictions, it's there. But the disparities, I mean, the wage disparities are still there. I mean, I think women still make about 80 cents on the dollar for what a man earns, and minorities tend to, people of color tend to earn even less than that. So, I mean, you hear the argument that, well, the legal structure is there, but yet the disparities are still, the wage disparities are still there and present.
And I do think that the 80 cents on the dollar is across all, it's not job for job, it's across the labor market in general. And so I think I think that's really important to say, because, people do make choices, and it's less than a nickel, or less than a 5% chance or gap for most professional jobs. So, and
by the way, these are, as a footnote, these are Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is a federal agency from the U.S. Department of Labor, and it's their stats. And people will criticize, well, it's the government stats, but they're the only ones who are keeping this type of data.
Right. Yeah, where else are you going to get it? Yeah. And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. On Thursday, March 20th, I'm hosting a webinar entitled Alt Control Deceive, Protecting Yourself from Remote Employee Fraud. While many employers recognize the advantages of remote work in attracting and retaining employees, most are unaware of, much less protected from, the risk of illegal activity and fraud unique to the remote environment. Foreign actors like North Korea, fraudulent employment verifiers, and dishonest overemployed workers are but a few of the sources of liability, data breaches, and financial losses employers have suffered. Using traditional deception methods and modern artificial intelligence tools like deep fakes, bad actors are targeting unsuspecting employers. In this 1-hour webinar, I'll discuss some of the ways that dishonest actors have harmed employers and practical steps employers can take to protect themselves. And just like this podcast, the webinar is free and pre-approved for recertification credit. You can register or watch the recording later by clicking on the Education tab at imperativeinfo.com, where you can also find all of my previously recorded webinars. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 1/2 hour of recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Research Credits. Then select episode 189 and enter the keyword Krugel. That's Krugel. And now back to my conversation with Charles Krugel. And so you mentioned the EEOC, and they've also, as Reuters put it, been hobbled by the administration because he fired 2 EEOC commissioners, and there'll probably be lawsuits on that one too, because there is one on the NLRB one. Because,
Wilcox, she filed a lawsuit.
And so it'll be interesting to see what happens there, but that's a long-term play. It's not going to affect employers directly, but the EEOC is going to be in the same boat.
It's going to be long litigation, I think.
And Samuels, who was fired from the EEOC, Jocelyn Samuels, said that she said directly she was fired because she and her fellow Democrat on the commission were fired because of their positions on sex discrimination and diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. President Trump has said, and he said on his inauguration day, those are discriminatory, and so he's pushed that. But the problem with DEI or the term diversity or any of that, it's in everybody has a different definition of that, right? And so definitely I saw, especially over the last 4 years, some DEI initiatives that were clearly, and even the EEOC is in their guidance has said, you can't do this because there's certain things that were just clearly a violation of Title VII.
Sure.
But then there were a lot of them where it was just like, we're calling it DEI, but we're really focusing on creating as diverse an applicant population as we can, because we want as deep an applicant population. We want to reach out to all these communities. We don't want biases that don't affect somebody's ability to do the job to get in the way of bringing in the best talent we can find, just period. And then once they're here, we want them to feel included. We want them to feel like they're part of the organization and they belong and they're heard. And so that is clearly not, a violation of Title VII. And so when we talk about DEI, a lot of employers are saying, is my DEI program legal or illegal? How would you counsel an employer to look at their DEI program and determine if it's going to get them in trouble?
Well, you have to look at where their applicant pool is coming from, where they're recruiting from. So, I mean, if they're only recruiting from certain zip codes, certain municipalities, areas, counties, whatever, that could be problematic. Years ago, I remember the EEOC sued a business in Chicago because they were recruiting only from Hispanic areas and didn't recruit from African-American neighborhoods. And they found that to be a violative of Title VII. And there was a settlement. The company ended up settling it before going to court. But anyway, so you have to look at the applicant pool, where you're advertising, how, that type of stuff, maybe the language that you're using. So, especially nowadays with AI types of interfaces. I mean, if you're going to try to use AI to create job descriptions or job ads, you have to make sure that you're using good AI, that they're using AI that, not just the KKK's database, but, from a more diverse database. So.
Well, and sometimes employers are just too clever for their own good, and they feed, okay, here's what my best performers in this role look like. As far as their demographics, they just feed, we've seen cases where with the AI where that's what got fed into the AI system, and the AI picked up on the wrong things.
Yeah,
it picked up that, it picked up on these guys were white men, not the fact that they had these levels of experience and these things that made them the engineers that company wanted. It picked up on the wrong thing.
It's the same type of statistical analysis you would use for examining or validating tests,
right?
Determining if a test is reliable and valid, personality assessments, whatever. So you have to and I'm not good at statistics, but you have to run like regression analysis or, to determine correlation coefficients and things like that. Is your AI database or is your job description or your job ad, does it measure or does it capture what you intended to capture in terms of demographics?
But far easier than that is just looking at, okay, what are we doing to get as broad an employment applicant base as we can? And without necessarily even worrying about age, race, sex, any of the national origin, color, but let's focus on making sure we get as many qualified applicants in the door as we can so we can hire the best people that we can afford. And then let's build a culture where people want to come to work here and they feel like they belong. And I think we focus too much on, is this going to get me in trouble or is this going to get me in trouble? And not enough on if you're running in a place where people want to work, those people don't go talk to plaintiffs' lawyers. And if you can just figure out a way to stay in compliance with Title VII, all that, definitely. But go well beyond that by just creating a place where people want to work and spending the time to do that and training your managers and all the things that come from creating that kind of workplace.
Well, I think you just boil it down to its core factor when you said training your managers. I think you got to train your managers, and I think the training that is involved is like cultural stuff to some extent, leadership and maturity. Train them to be mature leaders and adults, because I do a lot of investigations too, and I do investigations when I engage in litigation because there's a lot of due diligence involved, and that due diligence is basically investigation. And I think I see at least 2/3 of the time, the reason for a dispute, and especially a dispute that ends up in litigation, is because the manager, the people communicating decisions, whatever, they were poor communicators, poor leaders, immature, things like that.
Yeah, and employers have this idea that they need to keep all their cards close to their vest and give people, especially when it's negative news, as little information as possible. But in the absence of a good, and I've said this for years, in the absence of a good explanation, people are always going to assume the decision was unfair. And you're giving them an opportunity to go talk to a lawyer. And even if that lawyer says, hey, it's not illegal. One of my best friends is a plaintiff's lawyer, and he was talking about how they hate intakes on employment law cases because they say all day long, yeah, it's not illegal to be a jerk. It's not illegal to be a jerk. It's not illegal to be a jerk. And they don't take those cases, but those are the calls that come in. But there are plaintiff lawyers who will sit down and talk to that plaintiff, the potential plaintiff, and say, well, tell me about the rest of their operation, and go find something where they may be in real trouble.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't engage with your employees as business, they're going to engage then with plaintiff side attorneys or the EEOC or NLRB. They're going to, that's who they're going to go to the event.
And that wraps it up with a nice bow. That's all the time we have. Thanks for joining me, Charles.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
And all Charles's contact information and his excellent Facebook or LinkedIn group are in the show notes. We'll have all those links. And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please write us a review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you're listening. It helps us reach more listeners. Rob Upchurch is our technical producer, and you can reach him at robmakespods.com. And thank you to Imperative's marketing coordinator, Marianne Hernandez, who keeps the trains running on time. Speaking of trains, there goes the L train right behind Charles in Chicago. And I'm Mike Coffey, as always. Don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.